Could non-binary IDs create an immigration loophole? Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and before I get to the video, I need to add my name to the bandwagon of individuals that essentially beg for social media shares because analytics are way down for all of us. So if you feel other people would be interested, social media shares anywhere will really help. Anyhow, for a long time I've been wondering why exactly some lawmakers, media, and hordes of transgender activists have been pushing the idea of non-binary so aggressively onto the masses since around 2015 especially. I've made videos about how this all seemed likely to gaslight and control the intersectionals into playing along and pretending as if they actually see a person with no gender, similar to the "I don't see color" line that the left hates so much, when really, we generally see somebody we think of as female because that's their anatomy, usually chromosomes, and very often their fashion choices. Although that seems to definitely at least be a side effect of introducing non-binary legislation into places like Canada and Oregon, I had no tangible evidence or any particular specific reason that I thought a specific backer or two or three might do this. It just seemed like a power grab, and a way to disempower the masses by humiliating them when they're forced to claim to think things they don't truly believe. However, I noticed something new. You see, non-binary is a label that is extraordinarily coveted by the far left. And honestly, you really noticed that by the way that Contra Points actually got bullied off of Twitter by non-binary activists, so it shows just how important it truly is. Regardless, if you've spent any time in far-left circles, or even observed video of them, you can see that they have almost entirely changed the way they operate over just a few short years, in order to be accommodating to the genderless individuals in their presence.
Name, chapter, pronouns.
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
The reason they announce their pronouns is simple. These are people who believe that every individual has the potentiality to identify as non-binary, no matter how masculine or feminine they look. And so, everybody around them must first announce what their pronouns are, presumably so that the non-binary theys and thems in the audience know that the crowd will respect their pronouns when it comes up. Of course, the idea that people might sit around terrified because they are worried that when they tell everybody that they identify as genderless or somewhere in the middle is kinda odd. Everybody has brought up the observation of how emotionally fragile these people must be if that's truly the case, which is why many people assume it's just narcissism from these individuals, a way of having control over an entire space by way of being the special class that the entire room must accommodate. However, holding up a room and making everybody feel as if they are in an extremely cult-like and uncomfortable environment whenever you are around these crowds is by no means the only thing that is happening as a result of non-binary becoming more and more legally recognized across the entire Western world. And the more I hear about it, the more and more problems that might come along with this cultural trend, which is often seen as innocuous, truly sound. You see, when it comes to laws regarding non-binary or gender X being allowed on legal documents like birth certificates and driver's licenses, these laws are beginning to take shape all over the Western world. In Canada, there are numerous people who identify as neither male nor female officially on their legal documentations, and it's in various areas. In Germany, it's now possible with a doctor's note to do this, though tangible medical transitional evidence is not necessary. And even in the United States, it's possible to have your gender identified as X in numerous places, including Oregon, Maine, and California. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is all for this, as she celebrated the addition of the non-binary pronoun they in the Merriam-Webster dictionary on Twitter, and I think that's when I started wondering if maybe there was something that might happen here that I hadn't thought of yet. You see, although Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brings up all sorts of crazy crap that sounds almost identical to communism, such as the socialist and identity politics-focused Green New Deal, anybody who follows closely has probably noticed that she seems to care the most about keeping our borders as completely open as she possibly can, because without saying explicitly that she wants a world without borders, everybody has gotten the impression by now with her policy positions and her relentless lying about the conditions at the border that she's willing to put her ass where her mouth is, at least regarding that specific issue.
That never again means something.
And then finally, watching the Democratic LGBTQ forum, Marianne Williamson brought up something that I realized could actually be really important. By the way, she sounded by far the best out of all of them because her history with the AIDS crisis sounds very sincere and substantially impactful. Anyhow, here's what she said.
If I'm president, we will be expanding asylum, particularly in the case of LGBTQIA plus people who are in danger all over the world today. And America would would have such open arms, huge open arms. I'm aware of the Rainbow Railroad,
yes.
And I'm so impressed by people here and in Canada who are doing everything possible.
Interesting idea, huh? There are organizations in both the United States and Canada that seek to arrange travel and grant safe passage for as many, presumably LGBTQIA plus people all over the world to live in safety in the horrible patriarchal society that is known as North America. Still, I do honestly think Marianne was the best-sounding candidate last night, but the person who will probably end up with the nomination was Elizabeth Warren, who, according to her speech, said her first act as president will be to read out all of the names of trans women of color who've died from murder that year. So, it's not saying much that Marianne sounded better. Now, nothing against Marianne's good nature, honestly, because at face value, and I'm sure from her perspective, this should be a reasonable enough thing to do, to a certain degree. Unfortunately, we've learned from Marianne's surprise to find out that the left was smearing her that she's a bit naive about her own party, and probably how politics actually functions in practice. So I think she's probably missing a lot of info. You see, I have no reason to believe that she has any sort of mass immigrational aspirations, but maybe that's just me missing something. Regardless, what she's talking about with the Rainbow Railroad wasn't her idea, and that's what makes me a bit more nervous. And here's the thing. I looked over at the Rainbow Railroad's website, and what shocked me the most was how incredibly brief the description is, and lacking of any specifics that the organization reveals about itself. Essentially, and you can read for yourself, the organization just says exactly what she said it did, that it basically just helps at-risk LGBTQI people in other nations come to North America to live in freedom. But aren't there a few more details you'd like to know? For example, it says it works with queer people by adding the Q towards the end. Now, does that include non-binary, or are the NBs part of the Ts? It also gives no specifics about what happens to these people once they get here, such as whether or not they are helped to find citizenship, or whether or not these people will be held in veritable limbo, having trouble finding jobs and thus relying on social services and benefits in sanctuary cities that do often offer them to undocumented immigrants. Now, what sort of social services might such people obtain in the sanctuary cities? Well, in some of the more far leftist areas in our nation, such as New York City, illegal immigrants can stay in homeless shelters, among other things offered in other cities. And there's all sorts of things in places like San Francisco, such as letting parents vote in school board elections, even if they have no documents. That said, about the homeless shelters, due to the fact that the Democrats came down extremely hard on Ben Carson for stating that he was concerned about full-grown hairy men in women's shelters, how long might it be before every shelter might usher in a all genders welcome policy, or at least accept non-binary people into whichever shelter they choose to accommodate non-binaries, like the ones illegal immigrants can stay at in New York?
And let me tell you, if anybody, let alone a cabinet member in my administration, spoke the way that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development spoke yesterday about trans people, that would be their last day in federal service on my watch.
Now, we know for a fact that the Democrats have been caught red-handed in recent years trying to register illegal immigrants to vote in more major elections in Texas, and maybe another place or two. And a lot of people who are skeptical of the Democratic Party believe very strongly that this is happening a lot more than we realize. I don't know for sure. Thus, what I have to wonder is this. If the left gets back in power in the United States, or stays in power in Canada, would the recent legal push for non-binary recognition on official documents create a loophole for illegal immigrants to get safe passage to our nation, so that they can just come here because they want to, claiming non-binary persecution in their home nation as their reason, when working with organizations like the Rainbow Railroad? Perhaps so they can eventually maybe vote for the party that brought them here? I'm not saying that has happened, though it's possible. Still, what I'm wondering is whether or not somebody in, say, the Middle East or Somalia who wants to come to the United States for potentially unsavory reasons could contact our nation, claim to be trans, and in fear for their safety in their home country, when it turns out they've done nothing at all to transition, are more than likely heterosexual, and simply define as non-binary, because it was the quickest way to get a green card. Could that happen? Could people in other nations simply learn about the fact that they have to do no more than to call themselves non-binary and end up not only getting a green card to live in the United States, but also perhaps be given free transportation? Really, it's just a thought, but it truly is an idea that kind of scares me a bit, as somebody who witnessed 9/11 from my college dorm room. Yes, there are literally people out there that want to enter our nation and do terrible things, the likes of which are too numerous to pretend that I can count. There's a reason we have borders, and I personally agree with those reasons. I don't know, if this were to be true, maybe the left really does just assume that maybe these people will come over and become good, productive socialists or something kind of wacky. However, even if that's the case, the way the left acts like illegal immigrants are basically more important than our own citizens, would it potentially mean that these people would get to skip to the front of the breadline? At least for being non-binary. Just some food for thought. Please consider donating to me on PayPal or becoming a regular patron on Subscribestar. Also, make sure to follow me on Minds and BitChute, where I do occasionally make exclusive content, and I'll do my best to start cranking out videos again the way I used to. Have a good one.